Robschildseer, no investment advice. Welcome back to the series where we review every chapter of Benjamin Graham's book, The Intelligent Investor Revised Edition from 1972. Remember, this series is not intended to replace any content of The Intelligent Investor, but rather act as a place to review the read chapters. The link to the entire book is in the description below. Also, this series is intended to bring the subjects up to date to perspectives that people may have in 2024. And also, I like to add some additional commentary in the lessons and how they relate to his original, tome biblical version of his work, Security Analysis, 2nd edition from 1942. Today's episode is Chapter 19, Shareholders and Management's Dividend Policy. Since stock dividends are not really much of a thing anymore, this chapter lacks a little bit of relevance in 2024. However, some things have not changed and some things have gotten worse in terms of dividend policy. And we'll go over those things. I'll try to stick it at the end of the chapter. The end of this episode. Okay, so the chapter starts out with mentioning that since 1934, Graham and his associates encourage shareholders to question bad results or overly low stock prices. And I do remember from reading in Security Analysis, yes, he discusses this in more detail in Security Analysis. Specifically, one topic I remember him bringing up was that, how responsible is management of a company for a stock price being overly low? Is that like a sign of bad management? And he says, well, yeah, sort of. Basically, it affects their credit rating. That's one part of it. I'm not sure he discusses too much, but, it's like, it doesn't put the company in good light, which is just bad for the company. And it, as an investor, you will eventually want to be able to sell your securities at a fair price. And if it's at an overly low value, well, the management is not serving the owners, and the owners are the stockholders. We'll get into that subject a little deeper, at the end of the episode again. Now, he basically complains here. He says, even though we've been saying this whole time since 1934, shareholders need to get more involved and question bad results or overly stock prices. Again, in Security Analysis, he goes over this topic a lot with other things too, with shareholders being more involved. But he's disappointed here. He's complaining since 1934 and 1972, as the edition of this book was put out. Nothing's changed, basically. But one potential solution that has been developed were takeover bids. And it basically, bad management creates a bad stock price, making opportunity for a takeover and better management. So if you have investor out there, or a group of investors or investing company that sees more value in the company than what it's being sold for, they can do a takeover bid. They can go, say, hey, we'll buy the whole, the stock's only $5 right now. We'll buy the whole company right now for $10 a share. And that's actually can end up being a good thing, because then you have management that wants the company to do better and be at a higher stock price and make more profits. And so he says that was a sort of potential solution. But even though that had been happening, he says that I say that lazy shareholders still dominate, especially since the writing of this book. Another thing is the footnote mentions that since 1972 until 1980, things continued to go backwards in terms of bad management, with companies pumping out lemon cars and bad TVs. Apparently, the late 70s was a period of companies known for putting things out there of questionable quality. adding to the idea that bad management got worse. Anyway, moving on through the chapter, the next subtitle, Shareholders and Dividend Policy. He mentions how shareholders used to want more dividends, but now everyone thinks that reinvesting is best. For now, I'm just going to say not me, and since this book has been written, it's gotten a lot worse when it comes to dividend policy. Again, end of the episode, I'll talk about that a little more. There was, and then he goes over an example of an extreme price gain with zero dividend. And Graham can't believe that this stock can just go way up in price and not even pay any dividend at all. And it's just, I write LOL there because that's how all of corporate America works now. To pay a cash dividend is almost like, I mean, for some people it's a slap in the face because it makes you have to pay taxes. You know, if you're a billionaire and you're making billions of dollars of dividends, you don't want those dividends. You just want your share price to go up, so you can pay that lower capital gains tax. It's anyway, I said I was going to leave that stuff for the end of the episode. I'm doing my best. We're going to move on. He says that the newest trend in growth stocks is to have no dividend, and that dividend stocks have become more for income. So there being a separation of what's a growth stock and what's a dividend value stock, and we still have that today. We have companies that have high dividends, especially like commodities producers, for example, companies that are not expected to continue to keep growing and growing, basically industries that have gotten to their max production so much that they can control it. Look at the oil industry is the best example of this. If the oil companies want to make more money, they actually have to produce less oil, which is, and so areas like that, that's when the cash dividends make sense, because they're not looking to expand their business. There's already too much potential oil being made, and so what do you do with the money? You give it to the shareholders. That's what really makes sense. There's no way that it makes sense to invest the money back into the company when there's already like overproduction of whatever it is that you're producing. But anyway, we have a quote here. It is our belief that shareholders should demand of their managements either a normal payout of earnings on the order, say, of 2/3, else a clear-cut demonstration that the reinvested profits have produced satisfactory increase in per share earnings. Again, it's like in today's day and age in 2024, people have just not cared about cash dividends at all, to the point, again, where a cash dividend for a lot of investors is seen today as a negative thing, and certainly by the most wealthy of the participants, because of the ginormous difference in how those amounts are taxed. I'll get into my stance on this again at the end of the episode. The next quote I wanted to bring up from the chapter, he says, in many other cases, a low payout is clearly the cause of an average market price that is below fair value, and here the shareholders have every right to inquire and probably complain. So the way I see that is that it's kind of an issue that feeds on itself, being that, there's a low payout, and so as a dividend, especially if it's considered a dividend stock, the company isn't worth as much, because of it's not paying out as much, and then the company itself seeing its own share price low, I guess not having any reason to pay out more because it's already low. It's like it's sort of feeds on itself in that way. Moving on, we go over a point that I have a 5-star point here, quote, sometimes dividends are, and I quote, held down by relatively unprosperous companies to expand. And he says, we feel that such a policy is illogical on its face and should require both a complete explanation and a convincing defense before the shareholders should accept it. In terms of the past record, there is no reason a priori to believe that the owners will benefit from the expansion moves undertaken with their money by a business showing mediocre results and continuing its old management. And I mean, this is like probably the majority of the stock market at this time. The majority of companies could be described this way, as, you know, returning every penny, not giving anything to the shareholders and saying, hey guys, we're just going to keep growing the company. We're just going to keep expanding it. Yeah, and I see that as a massive problem in 2024. You know, one thing that I want to just bring up at this point is that sometimes people these days think of stocks as if it's a different form of investment entirely than it used to be, that stocks are somehow a different thing than they used to be. They're not different. All it is ownership of a company, and it is an ownership of companies. You know, Graham today would be shocked at how much worse things have gotten since 1972 in regard to those things. But anyway, moving on, we have a subtitle, Stock Dividends and Stock Splits. Now, interestingly, he goes over how he says it's important to understand the difference, and stock splits is to simply lower the price of each share. And if you've done any investing, you're probably highly aware of this happening. You know, when you have, I think it was Chipotle, for example, I think its share price got up to something like $1,300 per share. So if you... and then the newest development is you can buy partial shares now, so it sort of negates even the reason for stock splits. But the idea is that, you know, if you divide that into 10, you know, shares, you know, being $13 each or whatever, instead of $1,300 for one stock, it makes it easier to sell it in chunks that make more sense, and to have more people have the ability to buy the stock. You know, not everybody, there will be people that want to invest in Chipotle that can't necessarily afford one full share. So it makes it more accessible, and that's the only point of splits, really. Now, stock dividends, it's interesting. It's sort of the same thing. Like if you have 10 shares today, you'll have, let's say, 12 shares tomorrow. It's sort of similar to a split, but it's different in how it functions. Basically, on the balance sheet, it transfers earned surplus to the capital account. So money that's been earned is transferred into the capitalization of the company. So what the value of the company is by its stock. And so what it really ends up doing is it ends up subtracting earnings and basically paying out secondary stock. One way to look at it is, instead of having a secondary offering where the company's like raising new capital, it's taking the capital that would otherwise, you know, be maybe paid out in a cash dividend, and using it to basically turn that money into new shares and distribute them to the shareholders. It's kind of odd when you think about how you think of these things, but that's how it works. In 2024, stock dividends don't really exist, only really stock splits and buybacks. Again, the stock dividend part of that has to do also with tax benefits for the holders. And in today's day and age, there are no stock dividends. You have stock splits and you have buybacks. Those are the two ways that companies deal with rewarding their shareholders in terms of, you know, basically manipulating, you know, the stocks. You know, by the way, before 1980, buybacks apparently were illegal because it was considered to be manipulation. And I'll leave what I have to say about buybacks to the end of the episode again. So then he goes over the investor implications of stock splits and stock dividends. We have a section discussing stock dividends versus cash dividends and subscription rights. And so his argument being that, okay, some companies will do that he sees this as a good thing, that instead of giving out a cash dividend and having the stockholders have a subscription right to buy the shares, you just give them the shares, and then it makes your tax situation less complicated. All right, and then we have sort of an irrelevant point, but I wanted to quote it anyway. It is high time they thought about modernizing their major financial practices, not the least important of which is their dividend policy. Again, the main issues surrounding dividend policies, and in that last chapter, that last paragraph, he discusses another tax implication, but it involves, taxes and, really the psychology of the participants and, how to make things better in terms of dividend policy. And so this is where I wanted to get into my own take on dividend policies. The first thing being, I just wanted to emphasize who's the owner of the company. When you own Chipotle stock, who's the owner? You are the owner. Contrary to what you might believe, the CEO runs the thing. The board of directors hires the CEO. The CEO works for the board of directors, and the board of directors works for you. You're the actual owner. And so when it comes to dividend policies, the number one person that should be benefiting is the owner of the company. And unfortunately today, a lot of dividend policies of companies benefit the CEOs and their buddies on the board, which typically happens, and he discusses that a lot in security analysis too. Instead of the stockholders, unfortunately. And so whenever companies are doing anything regarding dividends, you can ask who benefits and how. When companies retain their earnings to reinvest into the company, or even worse, in my opinion, use the earnings to jack up the price of the stock higher and higher, it's all in the name of, I'm helping the owners because, they're not going to have to pay as much taxes. Yeah, well, first of all, we're talking about only the very highest earners out there. Your everyday Joe doesn't get nearly as much tax benefit as the biggest owners. And so there's, that discussion to be had. And with the stock price and the size of the company, investing in itself and becoming bigger and more powerful, controlling more people, the people, the management, especially CEOs and upper management, they end up benefiting the most from most companies' dividend policies today, unfortunately. And in addition to that, all the owners, most owners of stock don't even understand what they own. They don't understand that they own the company. And so, this way of things working will just keep continuing. One of the worst things going on today in 2024 is with companies doing buybacks when the price of the company is clearly extremely high. If a company is earning a very relatively low amount of money to the amount of to the value of the stock, and then they're using the earnings to continue to buy more stock, even though the price is obviously extremely high, that is a huge abuse to the current owners of the company, in my strong opinion, because what it's doing is it's just further inflating the price away from more realistic value. Responsible companies, by the way, when they have an overly expensive stock price, will actually sell more stocks, and that can actually benefit the owners because they're raising capital. When a company clearly is worth more than it should be worth, the responsible thing for a company to do would be to, if anything, to offer secondary shares, which I've seen happen with some companies very intelligently. If there are people, and I hate to say it, but if there are people dumb enough to pay extremely high prices for a company, well, then sell. So do a secondary offering. And don't do buybacks. Buybacks are the opposite of what you should be doing. The only time buybacks are truly appropriate, are probably one of the best things to do when the stock price is overly low. And he talks about this in the chapter, how his solution was, takeover bids will fix the problem. Just do buybacks. You have all this cash and the stock price is overly low, nobody wants it, then have the company take in a bunch of the shares. That's responsible management that benefits the owners, that benefits the current stockholders. When it's overly expensive, it's a great opportunity for the company to raise cash. When it's overly cheap, it's a great opportunity for the company to use its earnings to buy back all the shares that apparently nobody wants, and therefore increase the percentage value of the current stockholders. And that's what would really benefit the owners. I don't see any of these changes talked about, or I don't see them coming down the pipeline anytime soon. But if I were to rewrite The Intelligent Investor, that would be, I'd have a whole chapter on that. But anyway, that's all for today's episode. Chapter 19, Shareholders and Management's Dividend Policy. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Rob's Child.